Welcome to Everyday Greatness, and thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Barnaby Howarth. We're coming to you from the Wests Tigers Centre of Excellence, and I'd like to thank the entire team at Wests Tigers for having us in this incredible facility. This series is about winning fairly in business, sport, and life, and this is our second episode. You'll notice we have a new format for this series, as we've teamed up with Stronger Than My Excuses to co-produce this series. Stronger Than My Excuses are panel discussion experts, so we called on them for this series so we could offer 3 professional panels for our podcast and YouTube channels. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet today, the Wongal people of the Darug Nation. I love being Australian, so I want to thank our Indigenous brothers and sisters for walking hand in hand to make this a better country. On today's panel discussion, we have some incredible guests who are almost overqualified to talk about winning fairly in sport. We'll be asking them all why they think winning fairly is important, the outcomes people can expect if they decide to play fairly themselves, and the actions they can take if that's how they want to roll. Before we kick things off, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors and supporters whose logos you'll see running across the screen at various times throughout this episode. I'd especially like to thank the major sponsor of every series of Everyday Greatness, the ARA Group. I'd also like to thank the crew at Look Studio Australia for recording this show and all of your technical expertise. Right, now let's get this show on the road. Our panel today will be talking about winning fairly in sport. I'd like to introduce our esteemed guests. Please welcome Olympic gold medalist, Deputy Chef de Mission from the Australian Olympic team in Paris, Mark Knowles. Mark, thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming down from Brisbane to be here.
Yeah.
Also, the longest serving and interim Matilda's coach, Tom Sermanni. Tom, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
And Nathan Katz from Team Katz, who's an Olympic athlete and judo coach, and also a keynote speaker for youth development groups. Nathan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, no problem.
We're here to talk about winning fairly in sport. We want to start at the beginning and ask why. Let me ask our guests, what do you guys consider to be fair in sport? Is it just a matter of shaking hands at the end of the game or not taking performance-enhancing drugs? Or is there more to it? What about your behaviour off the field and towards your opposition on game day? Let's hear from Mark on this first. Mark, as a leader in sport, why is it so important to win fairly when there's so many people playing dirty in sport today?
Yeah, I think it's such an important topic that we're all looking at. We're all working with our athletes and our coaches on. We're also looking to other people in how they conduct themselves as well as ourselves. I think for me, one of the things that I'd start with is Barry Dancer, one of my favourite coaches, an Olympic gold medal winning coach. One of his slogans that has stuck with me my whole life is don't judge yourself against others. He said, look more to what you do and judge yourself against your own standards. And I always think about that is that when other people are doing things that are either right, wrong, or indifferent, like we don't have to be like someone else. And I think for me, when I reflect on my journey growing up in Rockhampton, I was certainly influenced by my parents and the way they behave, the way they conduct themselves. And my parents used to always say, you know, it's about how you are on and off the field. And I guess when I played for the Kookaburras, when I moved into the Deputy Chef de Mission role in Paris, when I'm working in technical leadership of Hockey Australia, it's about what we do, but also about what we say, how we act. And I think that's really important. And the last part is, for me, winning fairly in sport, it can be inspiring. You know, it's about what people see and the way you go about it. And I think sport provides a bit of an outlet in life at the moment, and it can be a real getaway for people. And I reckon that, yes, winning is important, but so is the way that you conduct yourself, and something I'm really passionate about.
It certainly can be inspiring, and the Olympic team in Paris gave plenty of those moments.
We did, and it's a nice team to be a part of, both as a former athlete and then moving into this role.
I'd imagine so. Now, Tom Sermanni, let me ask you, you've been involved in some pretty high-level national teams, Australia, the US and New Zealand. Do people actually care how they win? Doesn't everybody just want to win games these days at the national level? Does it matter how you do it?
It matters how. Some people probably don't care how you win, and I think there are extraordinary pressures on athletes now who people forget are young people making their way in life just generally and have, the usual anxieties that young people have in life. So there's an extreme amount of pressure. But I think that the key thing, and particularly if you're looking at it from a coaching perspective, it's setting a standard of behaviours. And I think that's the important thing. So everybody wants to win, but you have to set a standard of behaviours that are acceptable, not just to on the field, but are acceptable and generally in life. And I think that's an important role that a coach has to emphasise on athletes. And I think if you can blend those with your competitiveness and your willingness to win and your determination to win, then that creates an environment where, hopefully you're going to win games or win tournaments or matches, but at the same time doing it in a way that you feel is fair and that you've actually done it through hard work and real endeavour.
Very good answer, very wise. Now, Nathan, you're a former Olympian, now a coach in the sport of judo. Why do you try and encourage the kids you're training to play fair, and how do you make them do it when sport moves so fast these days?
Yeah, I think it's a complex answer. I think I only retired less than 12 months ago now, so I'm really young in this journey in coaching. But I think as an athlete, I was always really cognizant of the fact that I was one of the higher performing Australians, and there's a lot of young people looking at you as an example. And I definitely wasn't always perfect. And as these guys have touched on, there's so much pressure to win, but also so much desire to win. And sometimes it can be really difficult to separate winning at all costs with the way in which you want to conduct yourself and is the right way to do so. So it's definitely very challenging. I think as an athlete, I always sort of competed with the mindset that there was always someone watching that was using me potentially as an example of the right behavior to follow. And obviously there's pressure on me as a coach to get results and for my team to perform. And there's so much pressure on them to get the result and their own expectation too. But I think trying to separate performance from winning, I think, is a really good way of allowing them to concentrate on the way in which they need to perform and not just the outcome. I think when we're really tied to outcome, it can be so difficult to be really mindful of the way in which we're behaving. It's challenging and it can flirt with both sides of the line, but I think it's something that is really, really important.
There must be some wisdom seeping in from the old blokes next to you. That was an incredible answer. Thanks.
I love that because my granddad's slogan in life was, remember, someone's always watching. And I always think about that. And I heard that just then and I scribbled it down. I was like, this is amazing. That was my granddad's slogan in life.
Very true. Well, that ties in perfectly with my 2 cents on this topic. Since I've finished playing Aussie rules footy, just because of simply trying to not be a dickhead and realise that other people are watching, I have interviewed on Everyday Greatness the Governor-General of Australia, Sam Mostyn, 2014 Australian of the Year, Adam Goodes, Fox Footy host and commentator Sarah Jones, and Australian Paralympian Ahmed Kelly. Every one of those interviews came about through friendships built through sport and fairness. I never acted fairly because I thought I might one day host an interview show and need to ask these people to be my guests. I just focus on the game plan, and the result is taking care of itself with this show. Now let's move to the second question that I've pumped my own tyres. Let's look at outcomes. What outcomes are people looking for if they play fairly in sport? When people don't play fair, what does that do to the game or the people involved? And what would be a better outcome when more fairness is included? How do you find values-based things like integrity, respect, and kindness in a player? Let's hear from Tom on this first. Tom, when you debuted the likes of Sam Kerr and Caitlin Ford, did you try and impress on them the importance of their status as role models for Australia? Or did you just teach them how to win games of football?
That's a really good question. I think what you do with the young players is that hopefully they're coming into an environment that's already been created for them. So you're not actually having to emphasise that to them. Hopefully that's done through your management and your philosophies, but also done through the senior players that are in your team and have been in your team for some time. So I think, the key thing, I think Nathan touched on it, is that balance between performance and results. And that's particularly in sport where that really grey area comes in. So I think there's an importance, particularly if you're dealing with young athletes, it's about performance and about their development and about creating more than just a football player or a hockey player or a judo wrestler. Is that right?
Athlete.
Judo athlete. I apologise. I should have got my terminology right. The real challenge comes in the realistic world. Is that when you're at a top level and you've got a sport that's high profile, and the difference between sport and business is that sport, your result is immediate and it's out in public after 90 minutes or 10 minutes of a fight or 60 minutes or whatever. And the winning and losing is judged even more so these days, particularly with social media, a lot harsher than it used to be back in the old days. So it's a real challenge for athletes. And I think the balance and the key thing for coaches is to try and instill within your team or your club or your group or whatever is balancing those values with winning as well. And it's at the time, it's really tough. But, when you reach my age and you think back, if you have done stuff that's unethical, it kind of eats at you now. But it's hard to think of that when you're a young athlete because you just want to win. And if you don't win, you're getting criticised. So it's getting all of those things. And I think the coach plays a really critical role in that. And I think your club and your team and your organisation plays a real critical role in that as well.
Were you a young player once? I didn't realise that. That's incredible.
Well, I was young once.
I've heard a lot of people say when you were re-employed as the interim Matildas coach that the Matildas were back in a safe pair of hands. I think they're a lot better off than that. They're in a really generous, humble, good human being pair of hands. I really am happy for the Matildas. Tom, you're a wise dude.
I hope so. But the challenge is we've got games coming up. If we lose those two games, I could be an entirely different person in 2 weeks' time.
Well, they haven't.
I won't be a different person, but the whole story could become very different.
Yeah. Well, they haven't lost under you so far, so
no, we'll try and keep it that way.
Okay, Nathan, let's ask you: does playing or does competing in sport with integrity help you win? And if so, how does it do it? And have you witnessed anybody? Did you witness anybody at the Olympics that won because they competed with integrity?
Yeah, it's very complex. I think growing up, my dad was my personal coach since I first started judo when I was 3 or 4, all the way through to the end of my career. And I remember probably one of my most vivid judo memories. I was 16. I was under 19 national champion. I won the national championships that year. My dad was sitting in my coaching chair and I won in extra time, but I hadn't been behaving particularly well that day. As a young kid, I had a lot of tickets on myself. I thought I was going to be, everyone was telling me I was going to be the next big thing. I believed I was, and I was doing really well. And it sort of wasn't going the way I wanted it to this day, and I wasn't behaving great on the mat. And I'd won the final, which at that age was a huge effort, and I beat a boy that I hadn't beaten before. And I remember coming off the mat and Dad had just looked at me, and I knew in myself that I'd won and I had competed well, but I hadn't behaved well this day. And I just clocked eye contact with him and I knew that he was filthy and I knew that I was going to get an all-time spray at home. And we never talked about how good it was that I'd won. It was just the way I'd behaved that day. And I went back and competed the next day in the seniors. I won a medal. I didn't win. But I remember the following day, he just said that how much happier he was with that day because of the way I'd conducted myself first the day prior. And I think that's something that now as a coach really sticks with me because I think ultimately carrying yourself with integrity and those behaviors can help your preparation and your mindset more so probably than your on-mat performance. But I don't think that changes how important that carrying yourself and your integrity is on overall performance.
How old are you again?
29.
29. You're the wisest 29-year-old person I've ever met. You're like Buddha. It's incredible, mate. All right, now turning to more wisdom, Mark Knowles.
I'm not 20.
You broke your ankle twice when you were 19, trying to make the national team. During that recovery phase, did you give any credence and think of any importance about playing with integrity? Or did you just want to get back to being a hockey player and being the best player in the world?
Yeah, certainly for me, the piece around fairness and, why did this happen to me and things like that came into my mind as a 19-year-old kid. I'd never been injured before. And the first day I arrived in the national program, my dreams were coming true and I broke my ankle. So you think, how does this happen? What I love is, what Tom said around the environment that I walked into was one of absolute high standards. So I walked into that and I thought, this is normal, so it fit with all of my mentality of being a country kid, wanting to play for Australia, but seeing it daily and hearing it daily just allowed me to get back on track. And I think the last part for me was when we talk about at any cost, I'm a big believer that you give yourself the best opportunity to be selected or to win by what you do prior. And for me, at any cost was, okay, well, I won't go on a holiday with my girlfriend because I have to do my rehab, or I won't go out on the Sunday afternoon with my mates because I have to go to training an hour before to do prehab in the morning, So at any cost for me was missing out on some things as a 19-year-old kid, but it wasn't at any cost, at any reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're almost as wise as Nathan Katz.
Yeah, but I've got
Keep working, you'll get
I've
there.
got 11 years on it.
In all of my years as an athlete and a sports fan, I've never seen one person win a game or a match or any sort of contest because they played fairly. But I think the benefits of investing at least a little bit of time into how you behave when you're competing far outweigh the spoils of the cost of victory at any cost, as you said, Mark. How can deeply embedded negative cultures be changed within sports? Where does it start? How does it happen? And who should be taking action? Nathan, let's start with you on this one, the young Buddha. Can people who play dirty change? What do you think it takes? And what can viewers do to change if they recognise they're not being fair in sport?
Yeah, that's a complex question. I think it really depends. I think ultimately behaviour when it comes to being an athlete or a coach or really anyone in sport, it just comes down to personal choice. And there's a lot of factors that influence that. The pressure of competing in a sport which is very high profile, the pressure of an Olympic Games, the pressure of a big moment or occasion, a job, whatever it might be. And I just think ultimately people's behaviours are largely choices. Sometimes we react in a way that might not be happy with or proud of, but how we respond to those things is always a choice. And I guess I sort of use that example. It's a very minor example of when I was 16, 17, but how you wish to behave the next day and following on from that is your choice. I think you definitely can change, but there's also varying levels of doing whatever, winning at all costs. I think there's some things that you can come back ultimately from anything, but in the court of public, especially now with social media being so rife, is if you're, for example, a drug cheat, I think you're largely always labelled that regardless of, you look at like a Justin Gatlin, who was one of the world's fastest men, and anytime he'd compete, I watched him compete at the Olympics and the crowd boos him. And it's not because he's not an incredible athlete, but you've got this brush now of being a cheat. So it's very, very hard, especially if you make a mistake at a really monumental level, for that ever to be forgotten. But I just think now there's so much emphasis on the way in which we conduct ourselves. And I think a lot of the time now there's just so much emphasis on the way in which we conduct ourselves versus the result. Even though the result is always so glorified, as it should be, everyone wants to win. But I don't even know if I've answered that question specifically, but I think you can change, and I think behaviour can be modified, but whether or not people are very open to accepting that change, I think depends on the level of mistake and behaviour.
As per previous examples, you've answered the question perfectly, mate. Thanks. Now, Mark, let me ask you, as an outsider looking in on our Australian Olympic team in Paris, there seemed to be a crop of really good human beings that carried themselves beautifully. As Deputy Chef de Mission, did you and all your mates have practical policies that enforced good behaviour, or did you just get lucky and get a crop of really good people?
I don't think specific rules or guidelines for the athletes, but I think what was really clear with the leadership of Anna Mears and the AOC was Anna, when she took over the role in 2023 as the chef de mission, she was really clear on a couple of things. And I think when I think about great teams that I've played in or worked with or viewed from the outside, Anna had a clear vision, and she articulated that vision through multiple channels, multiple times to multiple groups. And I think the more people that heard that were involved in that side of the language actually shared it and bought into it more. So a clear vision was really important. Second part, I think, which was really powerful in Paris, was a really consistent message. So when Anna talked about we don't have a medal tally or a medal target, everyone said, "Oh, okay, that's fantastic, Anna. But how many medals are we going to win?" She said, "No, I'm serious." She said, because the Olympic environment is so big, it's so powerful, it's all encompassing. We do not want only the Olympic medalists to be, to be satisfied of being an Olympian. She said, there's so much more to it. You've worked for 4 years in one Olympic cycle, some for 8, some for 12, some for 16, some for 20 plus. She said, winning is not the only thing that will make us a proud nation. So I think that was really important, that it was just consistent. One of the most powerful moments for me was when we got up in the morning, we go down for a coffee, and you're walking around and you're shaking hands with athletes, chef de mission, deputy chef, coaches, and they said, "Oh, but I didn't win." We said, "I know, but look how good this environment is." And they went, "Oh, far out." And they would stand there and celebrate other athletes in the environment. And for me, that was a really powerful show of leadership and show of how you can conduct yourself in a way that shows that you care for others, that your message and your leadership is really consistent, and that you're going to stick to your vision. And I'm extremely proud that I got to be part of Team Australia. But certainly that leadership from Anna and the AOC allowed my role as a deputy to be so easy.
Can I add to that, Barnaby?
You can add whatever you like.
I think
mate.
Mark's humble, but I think not to make him feel old, but like I wasn't an athlete in Paris, but I think when you're saying there's just so many amazing Australian athletes, performance, but also like humans, and you see some of the interviews of like a Harry Garside when he lost, and he's just so raw and so vulnerable, and such a good example for like young people. I think all of that stems from the leadership and the people at the AOC and the chefs. And I grew up.
Very true. That's very cool. That's one of the most humbling things about being an Australian person for me, is that I'm sitting here with a gold medalist from the Olympics, a judo competitor at the Olympics, and the interim coach of the Matildas right now. And you just every day Harry Sacker rolls it. It's awesome. Just having a chat.
Yeah.
So Tom, let me ask you, you've been involved with a lot of football clubs as a player and a coach. Is there one strategy that you take to every new club you go to that works every time without fail?
No. No, it's a simple answer to that.
Okay, thanks.
But you do try to break, like, I think some of the key, there's a couple of things that I try to do. I have a kind of philosophy in the back of my head that when I go to a job, when I leave it, hopefully I've left it in a better place than when I went in there. That's what I think I try to do as a coach, and I assume every coach does. The second thing that I think is really important for players, particularly female athletes, is consistency. I think that is really important. And having gone through a whole variety of football managers, and particularly when I grew up playing football, you didn't have the same support staff, you didn't have the same strategies. You basically got shouted at if you played badly, and you got on with your job if you played well. But I think the key thing is consistency. I think what I've found is that having played for some of them, the coach that's Dr. Jekyll one day and Mr. Hyde the next day is the one that really throws athletes. And I think if you have a consistent, the one thing I emphasise when I take a team is that I don't have a whole set of rules. In fact, I don't have any rules. But what I try to do is have a set of consistent behaviours that I expect from me, from the staff, and from the players. But the key thing is then making sure that you stick to them and you don't let results and other distractions and other pressures get in the way of those.
That's a very good answer. I think a lot of people think they're successful and they're winning and they're doing their job well because they pretend they're adhering by the behaviours for a day or two. Yeah. But as you said, it's consistency. It's doing it every minute of every day. I used to think when old people, speaking of old people, used to say...
Stop talking about Nathan like that.
I was looking at Nathan.
Yeah.
There's no I in team, or a star team will beat a team of stars every day of the week. They didn't know what they were talking about. being a good person never won anybody a game of footy. But now I realise that's the stuff that builds the culture in sports clubs and associations. And that's the stuff that wins premierships. A bunch of good people all pulling in the same direction with the same goals and trusting each other. Now let's move on to the last question. I want to ask you all for your one word to wrap up the actions we just spoke about. One word that's an action that viewers can take away with them from this show. Can I start with you, Mark? What's your one word that sums up your messaging today?
I can't use consistency anymore, Tom.
Sorry.
So I'm going to go with relatable.
Very good. Relatable. I like it.
Thank you, Nathan.
Nathan, what's your one word?
I had one in my head, and I'm glad that Mark didn't take it because I don't have a second. But the thing I was thinking of, I guess that fits in with this theme of integrity and everything like that, is just legacy. The legacy that you want to leave. I won't. You said one word, so I'll leave it. I'll leave it at that.
You are a Buddha. You're the wisest I've met. And Tom, what's your one word?
My one word is actions. I've seen and gone into a lot of, usually when you go in as a coach, it's usually because somebody's got the sack and there's been issues and things, so you have to try and sort things out. And I've gone into quite a few teams in different environments where they've used up probably a small forest of butcher paper, going through a whole list of things that get slapped across walls and who then end up in the bin. And I think the key thing is anything you do, it's all about your actions. You can talk a good game, but it's how you act.
Very good. So you could have used consistency.
Yeah.
My one word is friendship. I think friendship is one of those things that people think they can do and look good and put it up on their social media every now and then. But it's one of those things you just got to be consistent about. Don't be a dickhead for a long period of time, and things tend to work out. Well, that's where we're going to wrap up today. I want to thank you guys all for your insights and for throwing so many pearls of wisdom on our audience. Thanks again to our venue, the West's Tigers Centre of Excellence, and all the team here. What a sensational venue this place is. Thanks also to our major sponsor, the ARA Group. And here's a little bit more about ARA.
Every day, we're here for you. We get things off the ground, keeping you connected. We're here keeping you safe and secure. We keep things running smoothly and know the importance of giving back. Every day, we're here. ARA, here for you, here for good.
Thanks to our sponsors and supporters whose names you will have seen rolling across your screens at various times today. And thanks to our guests, Mark Knowles, Nathan Katz and Tom Sermanni. Thank you all for joining me. Remember, you can watch us through YouTube or podcast on Everyday Greatness or Stronger Than My Excuses. And please share this show with anybody you think it might benefit. I hope you'll join us next week, where we'll be talking about winning fairly in life with some people who know all about it firsthand. 1990 ASP Women's Surfing World Champion Pam Burridge, former Socceroos captain Paul Wade, and the Managing Director of Sport and Life Training in Melbourne, David Burt. Thank you to our guests for joining us, and thank you all for watching. I'm Barnaby Howarth. Thank you for joining us.